Good afternoon, everyone, or I guess good morning, depending on where you're at. The webinar today is focused on just talking about sets in Bluebeam Revu. How do you make them, navigate through them, and utilize those? So I'm hoping that this presentation shouldn't take the full 45 minutes that we got blocked on for this, probably around 35-ish, maybe 40, whatnot inside of it. So hopefully give you a few minutes back of your midday here. Quick agenda, just overview of what I want to touch on today. It's just a few seconds on myself and USCAD. Who are we? What is the objectives for today? I want to make sure I cover with you that you take away from this presentation. Going through the actual presentation, all of it's going to be me picking and clicking live. I'm not presenting any videos, that kind of process. Go through it. We should have some time for some Q&A. And throughout this, regarding the Q&A portion, there is a Q&A icon within the Zoom environment that you can choose that to submit your questions in. I'll try to have that panel open so I can watch those. Even with that, the whole process here is being recorded. You will get a link probably at the end of the week, maybe early next week, with recording of this presentation, and all the questions that were asked will have answers to it. So you have that attachment as part of that as well. So who am I? Like I said, I'm Ken Phelps with USCAD. Going through the presentation today. I've been doing presentations like this for many, many years. Been around the horn for well over 20 years now. Actually, since I guess 1998 in the reseller channel. USCAD. Who are we as a firm, as a company that you can interact with and do business with? Also been around for 20 plus years, early 2000s. Full-fledged AEC technology. All the information you want to get into as far as any CAD design software from Autodesk, any Bluebeam software for your design review process to go through, any training, implementation process to go through. Even one that's often overlooked here in this little slide, it's kind of the bottom center one here, is about production and even just team augmentation. Everyone's worried about hiring good staff and good people nowadays. It's a big concern for corporations to go through and find qualified people. That's one of the assets that we can also bring to the table too. So if you want to augment your team, we can help you support in that effort as well. Like I mentioned earlier, some of the products that we support and we promote: an Autodesk Platinum reseller, a Bluebeam Platinum partner as well. Getting into different like AEC, M Suite, Panzura, the CAD learning. There's a lot of kind of products that we can bring to bear to help you support your needs and the process that you want to improve. Locations that USCAD has across the country. We've got California, across the Midwest, and the Southeast, and Atlanta, whatnot. And we have other remote users across the country as well, of Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, Texas, whatnot. So we're kind of across coast to coast. You can see the little link at the very bottom down there for even out in Hawaii, we have an office as well. So what I want to touch on with the group today is the three main bullet points. There'll be a lot of little miscellaneous details throughout the mix here as well. But first is, how do you make a set? Even beyond that, what is a set? What kind of use and value that you get out of there? And while you're working within the set environment, how do you introduce new revised files back into that documentation set? Very common, things change, of course. How do you get that content back into there so it'll be current inside of your set environment? And the last one gets into just publishing options. How can we get data out of there? Very common is that people still want to have paper. So how do you print the current set of content? How do you just get a log of all the files you have inside of that set? So whatever options that we can produce from that set environment, even other ways that we can leverage the set also inside of Bluebeam Revu. Let's just dive in. So getting into the software, I'm going to jump over here to my Bluebeam Revu. Of course, that screen I have for Zoom is not minimizing, so it's blocking my tools across the top. That's always fun. So when you're working with the sets, first off, where is it and what is it? So in my current environment right now, it's this little like stacked sheet icon that I have over here on the right-hand side. This is my icon that opens up the panel to interact and create sets. So one of the first things to look at, and one of the first questions to answer is, what is a set? A set is just a means to navigate through different PDFs as if it was a single PDF. So think of opening up a 50-page single PDF. You have your thumbnails view. You can click on all the icons and navigate through pages 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. You can have that same level of interaction within a set if I had 50 individual PDFs. I can have just a thumbnail view of all those PDFs that make up my entire plan set that I want to interact with. So for the set side of this, you can go into your sets and just make a new set. So this process goes through, just allows you to select the files that you want to include into the set environment. When you first pick that, little tooltip just pops up saying sets allows you to a collection of individual sheets. There's some informational tooltip about what sets includes. So you choose the files that you want to include into that set. Grab the add, and I've just got my files hanging out here. I'm going to grab a handful. This can be as detailed or as selective as you want to build it. So the files that you include is entirely up to you. So here's the files that come through. Now, all of mine here just happen to be off my current sample set that I have. They all have this A prefix to my sheets. They're all the architectural plan documents. But this will go through inside of the set environment and organize it by discipline for you automatically based on the sheet name. So if it's an A prefix versus an M for mechanicals or P for plumbing, S for structural, what have you, if you have that nomenclature being used, it'll organize those into those categories. And you can customize what that is. So inside of your options here, we've got the categories listed. This is just kind of the defaults out of the box setup. So anything with a G prefix to that sheet number goes into a general category, C for civil and so forth down the list. If you have certain ones that are unique to how you run your tagging and the business inside of there, you can create your own. So if you have a certain kind of a prefix to the sheet number that's for a given category, you can define what that is here. Say that you're not seeing my screen seems to be the comment. Let's see if we can't resolve that. Fairly certain I was sharing my screen. Oh, working now. Okay, good deal. Thank you. So again, you pick your files, whatever you want to include inside of that set. If you have to have other categories, other options that are here, you can customize that inside of this list. Now, what you'll go through here, it's going to go through a process of what's called auto marking. I've already ran through that in these files. That's why mine comes up automatically, but it'll prompt you to select the actual sheet like title, to do the window around the region of the PDF that contains that information. Then also prompt you then for the tag for the sheet number. So mine has my sheet number here, the sheet name being used for it. I've already done my extraction on that step. So you can pick and choose what is being shown out of that window here. Now, once I pull this in, you see these are all my individual PDFs. So each one of these is a separate PDF on the right-hand side. So that environment, that process looks very similar to how a multi-page single PDF would be from your thumbnails view. Grab any one of those files and it just jumps to that document. So each one of these, again, is a separate PDF inside here that I can navigate through as if it was a single PDF of multiple pages. So with this setup, you can interact with those files like they were a single PDF. And if it's categorized on the right-hand side here, you can minimize that particular department, that team, or that category to work on what might be specific to what your team has to interact with. That is one of the secondary benefits to working with the set, is that since these are individual files, you could potentially have multiple teams and multiple users engaged within the files that are defined inside of that set. So this set could be opened by multiple team members, and this entire data set could be maybe shared from a network drive. I could be working through the architectural plans, and you could be working through the structural plans, all as members of that set. Again, benefit being, since they are individual PDFs, you could be in PDF 5, I could be in PDF 27, and that's fine because they are separate PDFs. Now, you still can't have people in the same file at the same time. We both can't be in 5 because then we're both going to open the same file. But you can bounce through other files and not have to wait for someone else to finish their task and close the file out so you can open it and then do your task. Now, if you just simply have to add more files to this, I've got 8, 10 files inside of my list. A new email comes in with 2 or 3 more. All you have to do is come into here and just choose add files to set. So I can grab that, browse out to where I have those files located, choose the files I want to bring in, and now those just get appended to my current set that's used inside of here. If there are certain changes, so if I have a new revision made, I want to go through and maybe this one's been marked up. It's got all kinds of comments and other information added to the file. A new version comes in. So all those changes have been addressed, or hopefully they've been addressed. And there's a new Rev 1 or Rev 2, or whatever new submittal number is assigned to it. There's a new version of this file. So there's a couple ways to go about trying to introduce revisions back into your set. There's one that uses the Bluebeam Revu Extreme version of the software. That's for slip sheeting. And a way to do this without that extreme version of the software. So in this case, I'll go through and show the example of doing it without Extreme, and then show a version to do it with Revu Extreme as well. So if there is a new version of this file, go into your thumbnails, and this is just habit for me of where I go to find the tools. This is not the only place it's located. But I'll just choose to replace that page. I've got my current content, then I have my new updated revised sheet. So I can choose replace pages, go to that new revision. Which sheet am I currently on? Floor plan south, yeah, this one here. So the new version of that content is now available. I can then replace my current one with the new revised one. Now within this process, there's a one small checkbox that you want to be very careful if you do or don't have checked. This guy right here for replace page content only. You want to make sure that that matches what you're trying to accomplish. Let's talk about what that means. So with this unchecked, the entirety of my current page is replaced with the new revised file. All my markups that are currently here, all of that is gone, and the new sheet takes its place. If you have this checked, only the PDF content is swapped out and all your markups stay. You can verify what you have for your comments compared to the new version of the file and just make sure things were finished and changed accordingly. Well, it's a minor, subtle checkbox, but if you don't do that right, you might be shocked and upset potentially as to what you got for the results of that. But again, this can be done not just from sets. This is a process that you can do in any PDF and also in any version of Bluebeam Revu. Standard, CAD, or Extreme has access to replace the page inside of it. Now, for a different approach for doing this, there's a tool here called slip sheeting. Now, one of the benefits of this approach is that it can do it in a batch form. So it's not just, well, here's one page, right click, replace the page with a new one, go to the next one and repeat that process for each one of those new revised documents. On the batch menu, we're going to have slip sheet about halfway down, roughly, right down here. Inside of this, you choose the current files you have, which would be the current set documentation, and then my revised files. So what's the new stuff I want to compare it to? One of the benefits of working inside of the set is that I can just choose that as an option. So the open set just means all the files I have, if it's 10 or 310 or whatever it might be, just list all of that in my current files section at the top part of this dialog box. So here's my current files. And then revised files are where? Well, I have all of mine hanging out inside of a folder. So versus picking each one individually, I'll just say folder and go find where I have my files. So I've got mine hanging out inside of my sets folder, my revision 1. It'll load all the PDFs inside of that folder into my current dialog box. So how do we correlate these files to each other? We have this match by section down below. So you choose whatever makes the most sense for how it knows that this first floor plan south matches up with the other first floor plan south. How does it know these two relate to each other? You got your options of just by file name, by the page index. Page label is probably going to be your most consistent means of trying to associate these to each other. That does mean that you want to then go through and make sure you have the page labeling correctly configured on each one of those sheets. But that can be definitely a way to go through and look at those to make sure you have the right files matching up to each other. Don't you have that in a process that you think is going to make sense with the page label? Should work for me here. Just match your pages. So go through and assume this page should line up to that page. But knows that this one is tied to that one, and so on down the list. These are matched up. Now my current plan set had more pages in it than what was used for what was revised. So you're still going to have potentially some unmatched pages. There were no changes to these inside of my revised folder, so theirs aren't matched to anything, and that's fine. You don't have to have a match for everything inside of this list. But you do want to have at least a match for what's been revised. So it was this, now it's this. So how do you introduce those files then back into the set? So some options at the bottom half of this dialog box. We've got two choices. Got one option for replace, that's what's checked currently, and then one option for insert. So the replace current would be much like the option I had just shown earlier about swapping the page content out. Just get rid of the old stuff, my current version with the new revised version. The other option is maybe you want to hold on to that history. So you want to insert the actual current, the current file becomes, in essence, page 2 of the PDF. And then the new revised content is at the forefront of that. That becomes page 1. So if you want to hold on to the history, you certainly can. Just choose the right option down here so you keep both versions of that documentation. Then some options that you've got here below that, depending on what choice you made. So if I go back to the default was replace, I have a few less choices. So if you want to copy the markups over, this is that same checkbox I've shown before about to copy the page or the PDF content only or not. That's this. Then options to unflatten or flatten the markups once they're copied over. I'm going to show the option for insert. So one more option that I have in this list here is the stamp the current pages with superseded. So these will be stamped as superseded on page 2 of the PDF. Let this go through its process here real quick. So I want to take a few seconds to go through. Looking at my tags inside of here now, it does list each one of these for my revision. If it's been slipped in for a new version of that file, it'll change the version of that content inside of it. But as you're swapping things out and trying to introduce new iterations of that content, it'll keep track of the current revision of that information too. But slipped in 6 sheets. 4 of those haven't changed, they were unmatched. If you do want to make a report of this transaction of that data, like I had this current data set, slipped in a handful of new pages, you want to kind of hold on to that information, you can make your reports to hold on to it. But you have to have some kind of documentation about, yes, I changed files from A to B at this date and time and whatnot. Hold on to it. You can make your report right from here. So now how it shows up inside of the sets panel is that any file that has been revised, it may be hard to see on screen here. There's a little kind of a shadow edge of a sheet that's behind this one. So I can click on that little arrow right here to look at the previous file. So this is what I had. That was the old version. It's been stamped as superseded, so there shouldn't be any misconceptions about what is the current version of this file. It's a giant stamp across the center of it that says superseded. So it is the old one. And it did copy over all of those same markups from the old sheet to the new sheet. Any one of those that may not have changed, like these here, had no changes to it. There's no sheet behind, nothing stamped as superseded because these have not been revised. It's the same data set I had previously. Now, if you introduce then another change to it, it just becomes another sheet, another page within that PDF. Now, for any kind of output to this, so after you've got the right files inside of there, ways that you can interact and work on this set, I can print the content out of here. So what do you want to print? Days of paper are dwindling, but they're not gone. You're going to still have some use for paper by someone. So when you go through and you choose to print this out, you have the option to print everything, meaning every sheet of every PDF, current and revised, or if you want just the latest. Just give me a current plan set for what my current status is of all these files. I don't care about what's been revised, any older sheets, stamped as superseded. Don't need that. Don't print it. Also, when it comes to printing, however you have the structure of your set set up. So if you got multiple categories, you got structural and mechanical and civil and whatnot, all the various categories that you may show within a plan set, however you have this displayed, it prints what is shown. Meaning if I have the civil content shown and then maybe some structural content shown, I have the architectural and mechanicals collapsed. If I print that, I'm going to print the civil and the structural. If it is collapsed in this list, it by default won't print as well. But this also can be used in ways that you may have not thought about. There are some ways to go through and do some batch like comparison. So before you start, dropping in the new versions of the files, you want to go and look at, well, here's my current plan set, and then here's all the new revised sheets. You want to run a batch compare? You run that batch compare, and you can then use the set to define that list of your current documents. You may have chosen just all the files individually in the past, which works fine. You don't have to have Extreme to have access to sets or even the batch comparison to it. Extreme works, or sets works without having to have Bluebeam Revu Extreme. You'd have to have the Extreme version of software for the batch slip sheeting effort. But batch compare is also not part of Extreme. You can do that inside of here too. So I can pick those and then pick the folder for my revised sheets here instead. You can do your batch comparison this way. That might be a faster approach to maybe understand what has changed with your files before you start slipping in the new sheets into your set. Same thing with the overlay too. It's the same approach. So if you had your batch overlay, you can choose the set to grab your current files from, point to a folder for your new revised documentation, and run the overlay against those pages. Then one of the last things with this effort, beyond just the printing side of it, is just having a drawing log. What is all the content? What is all the current versions of the files that I have inside of my set? That's also on the publish option here. I can do the export drawing log. You're just going to get, in essence, an Excel spreadsheet that lists out all that same data I had inside of my tags list, that tags dialog box. All of that can be printed out. So you want to figure out what is the current version of the files, any of these columns that you want to have included. If you need or don't need, you can choose to check or uncheck whatever is required inside of that list. Uncheck a handful here. And then make your drawing log. You can set it to Excel, as far as an XLS, CSV, PDF, what file type you want to export as, the name of that, and then where is it going to go. So I'll run through mine real quick. And of course, it's on the wrong screen. We'll pull it over here. So here's what that drawing log would look like. It's got the revisions inside of here. If it has been superseded, it will be checked off inside of the list. And these are then the links to those files as well. So if you want to make a whole package of this content, you could make a whole package out of this, send it off to whoever has to receive this, and have links to all the content. Have a nice little bow wrapped around it with all these links by off this log sheet to access that content. I've kind of fire hosed a bunch of stuff at you. Take a quick look at the questions that are here. Save customized categories and load in the future sets. Yes, you can. You can define what that is up front. You're not forced to define any custom values each and every time as you create the set. That's just getting into the preferences that you have. So within preferences, you go into sets and you have categories here. So you can control, like, does G go to a general category or do you call it something else? You can define the structure of this any which way you think makes the most sense for how you use the naming scheme for categories. So to make changes to any one of these, I can select that and I can just simply double click inside of here. So in general, it should be called something else. I want to call it comment or whatever you want to have there for a name being used. That's just the next question too about how to edit the sets categories. Coming into here and just simply double clicking. We'll go through and customize that. If you want to make a brand new one that's not in this list, and I'm not going to modify an existing one, just click new or the plus and make your own category. You know, what is the text prefix? That's the filter portion down below. I want to use T for a certain thing. If it's got a T number inside of my sheet number, use that. That becomes my filter to it. The question here too about missing where sets came from. I think it may have been cropped up on the screen a little bit, but the sets, it's a little icon over here. It looks like a stacked set of sheets. In my case, in my screen, it's on the right-hand side. So this is your sets. Now with the set, I've made the set, I've interacted with it, I've revised the sheets inside of here, but I technically haven't even saved my set definition yet. So what I would probably recommend that you do as you're going through and you're building out this information, trying to build what files are used in the set, is do that, make a new set, pick the files you want to choose inside of here, but then also save your set. So if I close out of this, if I close review and I don't save the set, then that whole setup of what files are being referenced by it is lost. So make sure you save that as well. Other question too about where the files are coming from. They're staying where they were sourced from. So if you're pulling 2 files from folder A, 3 files from folder B, and 10 files from folder C, and you build your set from files from those different locations, they're still being pulled from those locations. It won't consolidate that into a cached sets location, what have you. They're still being sourced from those original locations. Other question here too about if the set's open, is anyone able to save, overwrite, or work on the PDFs themselves? And they can, as long as no one else is already in them. So the same kind of a protocol comes into play here for, I can't have 3 people in a Word doc at once. I can be in a Word doc and modify it, save it, put back, and then you can, but we can both be in 2 separate Word docs. Well, that's one of the benefits of the sets here too, is that these are all still individual files. So I could be in the first one here for all my general notes and whatnot, and you could be in the second one. But if you had this content in some centralized location, others could open that set also and have the same list of documents that they could too interact with. If you have more questions, feel free, keep them coming in here. There's a nice laundry list here of questions, which are awesome. I will go through all of this in the spreadsheet at the end. I'm not sure I'll have time to go through every one of the questions. So there's a lot coming in here. Let's see if I can't find some that are common. Is slip sheet different than compare documents? Yes, slip sheet is absolutely different than compare. Compare is a means to go through and say, here's my current document set that I've marked up. I got red lines all over it, and a new revised file comes in. I want to compare those to each other to see in cloud what areas are unique and different between these 2 files. Whereas the slip sheet is just taking my current file and replacing it with the new content. It's not comparing it, it's just changing. So you may want to go through and do the comparison and understand those changes first. And if you're confident, yep, that all looks good, I approve of these changes, you can then slip that into your current set so you have the current version of that file. We're working on sets in the context of a session. That, to be honest, is one I've not tried to do yet. I don't believe that you can work on a set in a session, because that would be almost unnecessary, because you could have all the files inside of a session. So I got 8 or 10 PDFs being used here, whatever I chose. Those could all be inside of a session. And then one of the benefits and values of a session is that we can all work on those files concurrently in the context of the session. I don't think we can do a true set in a session, but as a follow-up to that, I don't think we would need to. So other question too about, do sets work with a studio? So the sessions piece, I've not tested it, but I don't believe it will. It can work with studio projects. One of the main things to have this be viable and work within a project is how you initially create the set files, and you also have to have the set file itself. So I choose to save this set. It does make a file, which is basically just a list of all the shortcuts to the files themselves. That also has to be in the project. So part of that workflow just gets into, how do you originate the set? Where do the files come from? And how well does it interact with those? You want to have the PDFs in the project, make the set from the files in the project, and also add the set file to the project. It should work through and navigate through these files just fine. Other question here too about a multiple page PDF. That's one of the common, I think, I won't say misconceptions, but misinterpretations of the set, is that it has to be for one sheet PDFs. And that's not necessarily the case. There's times you can have a multi-page PDF. So one PDF of 10, 20, 30 sheets. Those could also be in the set. So think of yourself as having a job of 10 PDFs, and each one of those PDFs is multiple pages each. You can take those 10 PDFs and make a set out of them and still able to navigate through those PDFs. So it's like a nested structure, so to speak. So you could have a multi-page PDF inside it. Because if I look at what my revision here is, this revised file, look at my thumbnails, it's just a 2-page PDF. Now page 2 is the original with the stamp of superseded across it. Again, this could be a multi-page PDF. Now that doesn't work as cleanly with something like slip sheeting, because as you introduce new pages, where does it go? How do you track the history if you want to do that? That causes some workflow challenges in that process, but you still can. So one of the comments, I think I scrolled by it too fast, but it says, I don't have the sets in the Bluebeam. How do you get it? You should have sets. So part of it should be just a question of, do you have the icon for that panel enabled? So you want to look at, just by simply right-clicking on any one of your panel icons, go to your show and make sure you have sets enabled. It has the blue highlight behind that one. If you don't have the blue shading behind it, and then just that icon for the entire panel is not available. So you should have sets. Sets is not unique to a certain version of Revu. Standard, CAD Extreme should all have it. I'm not sure if maybe you're on a much older version, like you're pre-2017 for what you have. Maybe it's not within those versions of it. So is that stamp for superseded going to show? Yes, it's a stamp on the file. So that being superseded, if you print all the versions of that, that's just a sheet, and all the content on it, all the markups on it would show, unless you chose to print the PDFs without markups, then that stamp for superseded would not show. Otherwise, it's a markup that you would have on the page that you have on the print. We have a lot of questions coming in. That is awesome to see. I can tell you right now, I'm not going to have time to get all of these. There's probably a good 30 plus questions that I've not even had a chance to look at yet. That is awesome to go through and see. I think what I'll do versus just keeping you on here answering questions and whatnot as we go through, keep asking your questions, type them in. I'll wrap things up here so we can go through and maybe give you a few minutes back of your day. I'm about 5 or 7 minutes shy of my 45-minute time frame. So Q&A. Yeah, just for next steps, if you wanted to dig deeper, you got more questions about just Bluebeam in general, it doesn't have to be on the sets piece of it, just ways that you can leverage the software inside of your workflows, let us know. So if you want anything that's personalized, to what your company does, reach out to us, use the email or the phone number to access our resources inside of here. And lastly, just thank you. I appreciate your time. Try to fit in as much as we can in a small window of time. Hope you found some value and benefit to talk about the sets piece of it.